What makes a good item writer?
Well, I think there's really two features in finding a good item writer. First of all, they have to be an excellent writer in the language in which they're writing the item. And second, they have to have teaching experience. Of those two, quite frankly, writing ability is the most important. There are many people with teaching experience who do not make good item writers because they lack the writing ability. You can take someone, however, with writing ability and train them to write good items in an item writing workshop. As far as who I look for when I'm looking for an item writer when I'm about to develop a test, I start with published textbook authors or educational materials writers. These are people who have demonstrated ability to write clearly and demonstrated knowledge of how something is taught and what is the learning process. That is, the fact that they're writing a textbook to learn something indicates that they have a good feel for what it is that's being taught. So that's the ideal person. However, in trying to find item writers who are published textbook authors, obviously there's not too many of them out there. So that supply is rapidly exhausted, and from there you move to the next criterion, the next most important criterion of the two, and that is writing ability. When I am looking for people who are going to be item writers on a project, I obviously would like to find people who are experienced item writers. But again, the number of experienced item writers may be few, particularly if you're dealing with an uncommonly taught language where you're developing a test in that language. I, in that case, look first for people who have a degree in literature in that language. I find that people with degrees in literature have a broad sensitivity to language, and that allows them to develop the item writing skills that are necessary. Beyond that, if they also have teaching experience in the language, then that's icing on the cake, and that's even further certainty that they'll be able to write good items.
Are there any principles of good item writing?
Well, there are many principles of good item writing, and in the sense the principles that are relevant to good item writing vary according to the type of test that you're developing. But in general, I would say that good item writing starts with looking at the test specifications. The test specifications typically deal with item format, with the audience, the specification of the audience and the purpose for the test, and finally with the test content. And there may be a detailed content specification. And then if it's a really complete set of test specifications, there will also be what are called item writing guidelines. And in the item writing guidelines, if there are a set of detailed test specifications, there will be item writing guidelines that are relevant to this particular test. And there will probably also be some sample items, and those sample items will be some good items and some bad items, and a discussion of why the good items are good items and why the bad items are flawed. All of this related to the discussion of relevant item writing guidelines to that test. So in terms of good item writing guidelines, an item writer would really want to start with a complete set of test specifications, and hopefully they should be covered therein.
What do you look for when you review an item?
Well, review is actually a much more complex process than most people think. It's actually one spends more time reviewing items than one does writing items, 2 to 3 times as much time, I might add. And that's because the review process is an iterative process. But I'll go to that issue later. Let me simply say that the review process, typically we can talk about 4 issues in review: the content review, the key check, a bias review, and finally editorial review. In the content review, we are in fact comparing the item with the specifications. We're looking to see if typically an item that is drafted will also be referenced or classified according to the specification. And so the reviewer is looking to see if he or she agrees with the content classification of the item. They're also asking relevant questions like, is this an important or relevant issue for a test item? Is it an easy item or a difficult item? These are all important issues in the content review. The key check is often, there's a tendency to ignore the key check in the item review and just look at other matters with the assumption that the key is obviously beyond dispute. That's a mistake. Many flawed items turn up which after the field testing, which a good key check could have identified. The key check, and the reviewer is always going to look at the key which is specified by the item writer and submitted along with the content classification by the item writer, and then the reviewer will consider the key whether or not this is the only possible correct answer. If it's a free response type of item, then multiple keys will have to be indicated, and the reviewer will have to ask himself or herself whether there are any other possible keys that should be listed in the list of acceptable responses. But let me just mention one other factor in the item review process, and that is that in addition to the key review, we also have bias review, and in the bias review, there we're looking really at two things. First of all, is there a content bias? Is the nature of the item going to favor a particular group of examinees in terms of they are more likely to be familiar with that context or with that content? And a typical problem is in the area of reading comprehension items where we have a text which is, of course, cannot be devoid of content. And so if it's a text relevant to chemistry, then students who are chemistry majors or have a strong background in chemistry may do very well on it. The challenge, of course, in item writing and selecting a text is select a text which is neutral. It's not that it's devoid of content, but the content is not likely to be known by a specific group. There's also the issue of sensitivity review, or what we type of sensitivity bias, in a sense, where really what we're looking for is in the wording of the item, is the wording likely to be offensive or insensitive to any particular group of examinees, and therefore it might upset that group of examinees. So those are two issues that you look for finally in the bias review. And the final area of review is the editorial review, and that's probably the most extensive because there's a great deal that you can do to rewrite or reword items. But the issues, of course, are mechanics, punctuation, spelling, grammar, clarity, and finally style of writing. Those are, and of course, one could talk at length about what goes into all of those issues, but simply it should suffice to say that a good deal of the comments that an item, that a test review will produce will have to do with the editorial review.
How many times should an item be reviewed?
As many as possible, or certainly as many as needed. There, again, is a tendency to think that the items don't need to be reviewed if they're written by an experienced item writer. This is even experienced writer, just as every writer needs an editor, every item writer needs multiple reviews. A good item writer can produce items that can survive multiple reviews, whereas a poor item writer won't. But the items will always be changed and polished. Essentially, I tend to think of the item review process as consisting of two stages. First, we review items horizontally in the sense that the items go out to more than one reviewer, to two or more reviewers, to multiple reviewers. So we send them out to several reviewers. We then get back a set of comments from different reviewers. We look at those comments and we compare them on each item, and we use that set of comments to revise each item. Then we take that revised version of the item and send that out again to a different set of reviewers, not to the same reviewers, but to now a new set of reviewers who are going to be looking at these items as original items for the first time. They're going to comment on them, and their comments will come back and we'll revise the items again. So, and this process will repeat itself until the comments that come back on the items are either raising issues that have been dealt with previously or are not raising any issues at all. At that point, the item review process is complete. We know that it's not generating any more improvements in the items, and at that point it can cease.